These arguments made today were all made in the 30s. And 50 million people die when people in power like us in the Senate don't understand the world in which we live in. Putin has raped and murdered en masse Ukrainians who just wish to be Ukrainians. To Senator Paul, if he gets away with this, there goes Taiwan, but you'll do nothing for Taiwan. I don't know if you'd do anything if they actually went into Kentucky.
A senator stands alone on the floor, and he's not talking to the chamber anymore. He's talking about a choice this country is about to make, one that history has seen before and got catastrophically wrong.
The senator from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will be asking unanimous consent request here in a second. But my colleagues on the Democratic side, a lot of people in the country are wondering, can we ever do anything together? We've done some things together, but nothing more uniting the Senate since I've been here than the response we've achieved on both sides of the aisle regarding Putin's barbaric invasion of Ukraine. We have 85 co-sponsors giving President Trump the ability to tariff countries that buy cheap Russian oil to keep Putin in the fight. That's a major accomplishment. And we also have a bill making Russia a state-sponsored terrorism under U.S. law that I believe passed through the Foreign Relations Committee unanimously. Now, what does this bill do? It designates Russia a state sponsor of terrorism based on the fact that Putin's Russia has kidnapped, for lack of a better word, almost 20,000 Ukrainian children in the occupied territories controlled by Russia in Ukraine. We had a hearing last week about this. It was amazing what we learned, that some of these Ukrainian children are being taken from their families in Ukraine and wind up in North Korea. I couldn't believe it. 200 different camps that these kids are being put in to make them Russian. This is one of the greatest outrages of the 21st century or any other century. And we had compelling testimony from the Ukrainian ambassador and NGOs that follow this, detailing the brutality of Russia's effort to separate Ukrainian children from their families and turn them into pawns of Putin. Some of these kids have been taken as young children. Teenagers are now in the fight for Russia. The videos are just break your heart. Now, how does the bill work? Within 60 days of passage, if Russia has not come up with a plan to return the kidnapped children, there's no process of reintegration. If the Russian government is still attacking civilian infrastructure, then Russia will be designated as state sponsor of terrorism. And when you look at international terrorism activities, they include kidnapping under Section 2331I of Title 18. So this legislation is designed to label Russia a state sponsor of terrorism for the kidnapping. We estimate up to almost 20,000, probably more, Ukrainian children in the occupied territories. If this doesn't make you a terrorist state, what would? For us to turn our back on this problem, I think would be the worst possible signal we could send in terms of world order. I am confident that if we get a vote on this bill, it will pass overwhelmingly because most senators want to be on record of saying, I did something necessary in the face of brutality. The one thing I've learned in my time here, if you appease aggression, you get more of it. If you're silent in the face of evil, it will grow. So to my Democratic colleagues, Senator Shaheen and Blumenthal, and so many others, you've been great to work with. We have tremendous, wide and deep bipartisan support for this. And I'm hoping that the negotiations in Berlin will bear fruit, that we can end this bloodbath in a way to prevent a third invasion, an honorable and just outcome, I don't think Ukraine can evict every Russian soldier, but having said that, you don't want to reward Putin for this invasion. You'll just get more of it. We have to prevent what happened in 2014 and 2022 this time around. But one of the tools in our toolbox is to label Russia a state sponsor of terrorism for kidnapping these children. It would make the Russian economy radioactive. There are only 4 nations that are designated state sponsor of terrorism under U.S. law. This would be number 5. It's a well-deserved label based on the conduct of Putin regarding Ukrainian children. So in that regard, I would ask unanimous consent that notwithstanding Rule 22, the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 246 S2978, that the committee reported substitute amendment be withdrawn, the Graham substitute amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to, the bill as amended be considered, read a third time, and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table. Yeah, I'll respond.
Senator from South Carolina.
And turn it over to my colleagues. Number one, you're very consistent, Senator Paul, in the sense that you do not believe that standing up to aggression stops it.
This is the fault line that never gets covered honestly. On one side, a senator arguing that disengagement is peace. On the other, a senator arguing that disengagement is an invitation. Neither side is lying, but only one of them is accounting for what happens after the withdrawal. Graham's real argument isn't about Ukraine, it's about deterrence architecture, the invisible framework that keeps Taiwan, the Baltic states, and a dozen other flashpoints from igniting. When that framework is questioned publicly by a sitting senator, adversaries notice. Allies notice more. The mainstream coverage will frame this as hawks versus isolationists. That framing buries the actual question. Drop a comment. Whose foreign policy doctrine do you think history will vindicate?
I do. When you appease it, you get more of it. In 2014, Putin invades Crimea. We end that conflict only to have him invade again in 2022. You can have your opinions, but you need to listen to what the enemy is saying. If you believe Putin's going to stop voluntarily, you're completely discounting everything he's said and everything he's done. He's going to go till somebody stops him. Not one American soldier has died in the effort to stop him in Ukraine. We have provided weapons, we've put sanctions, we've done a lot of things, but the war keeps going. Senator Paul advocated for getting out of Afghanistan, Syria, you name it, he wants to leave. The problem is that the people that you leave behind want to kill you. Senator Paul doesn't believe that radical Islam is dedicated to the destruction of the American people, our way of life. I do. Under his model, if you leave them alone, they will leave you alone. There's really no reason for us to be forward deployed because we're safe if we just ignore them. If you ignore Putin, there goes Taiwan. All the negotiations, I appreciate, they haven't worked. We're negotiating and Ukrainians are dying. How many Ukrainians have died since these talks have been going on? To my friends in the Trump administration, you have an obligation to bring this war to an end for the good of the civilized world. I appreciate you going to Berlin. I hope we come up with security guarantees that will prevent another invasion like in 2014 and 2022. I hope America will say the third time around, Putin, you come into Ukraine after we have a ceasefire, then you run into the coalition of the willing and the United States. And if you don't say that, Putin will come back. So the worst thing you can do is not understand the times in which you live. People didn't understand Hitler. These arguments made today were all made in the 30s. And 50 million people die when people in power like us in the Senate don't understand the world in which we live in. Putin has raped and murdered en masse Ukrainians who just wish to be Ukrainians. To Senator Paul, if he gets away with this, there goes Taiwan, but you'll do nothing for Taiwan. I don't know if you'd do anything if they actually went into Kentucky. The point is, The rest of us believe you're the outlier. There's nothing about the Washington establishment here. It's about common sense, learning from history, having a half a brain when it comes to dealing with aggression. If you think ISIS is going to leave you alone because you want to leave them alone, that's insane. If you think Putin will stop until somebody stops him, you've missed a lot. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to make it hard to do business with Russia. China is the #1 purchaser of Russian oil, cheap. The #1 purchaser of Iranian oil, cheap. The #1 purchaser of Venezuelan oil. What does that have in common? China is propping up all these dictatorships. Without China, India, and Brazil buying Russian oil, cheap, Putin would have no money virtually to prosecute the war. So we're trying to make it hard to prop up Putin's war machine. A state sponsor of terrorism designation against Russia would matter. It would cripple his war machine because he'd be radioactive in terms of doing business. And if you turn your back on a regime that kidnaps 20,000 children, takes them away from their family, appropriates them to Russia, then boy, have you lost your way. If that's not terrorism, if that's not something America should care about, what the hell should we care about? We're labeling the conduct of Putin for what it is, state sponsor of terrorism. So let it be said that in 2025, almost everybody in the Senate, except 2 or 3, believes that Russia should be a state sponsor of terrorism under U.S. law, not to go to war with Russia, but because of their conduct of taking 20,000 children away from Ukrainian families, putting them in camps in Russia, and sending some of them to North Korea. If that's not something we should push back against, God help the world. If Putin gets away with this, the world will, only time will tell what would happen. To my Democratic and Republican colleagues, thank you for working together with Senator Blumenthal and myself. Senator Sheen, you've been terrific. Thank you for letting Russia know if this war doesn't end honorably and justly, we're going to crush your economy. We're going to come after your customers. Putin will go as far as he can go till somebody stands up to him. That's what I've learned when it comes to Putin. And as to the United States Senate, this is one of our finest moments. This is one of our finest hours where we came together to create legislation to punish a country that would kidnap children of another country, rape and murder and pillage. So thank you very much, and I turn the floor over to Senator Blumenthal.
What you just watched wasn't a Senate floor speech. It was a senator telling his own colleague, on record by name, that he doesn't have a half a brain when it comes to aggression. That doesn't happen often. And when it does, it means something beyond the insult. Graham wasn't losing his temper. He was making a calculated decision to force Rand Paul into the frame, to make the disagreement visible, named, and documented. Because when the next invasion happens, Graham wants the record to show who said what, and when. That's not passion, that's positioning. But here is what nobody is asking. Why is this bill, with 85 co-sponsors, passed unanimously through committee, still not getting a floor vote? 85 senators. That is a supermajority. That is a veto-proof margin. That is not a close call. So what is actually blocking it? One senator, one objection, one hold. Think about what that means structurally. The entire weight of the United States Senate, both parties nearly unanimous, can be stopped dead by a single member invoking procedural privilege. That is not a bug in the system. That is the system. And depending on your politics, that either looks like a safeguard against mob governance or an instrument of obstruction dressed up as principle. Both camps are missing something. The supporters of this bill, the Graham coalition, are absolutely right that the kidnapping of 2,000 children is not a policy disagreement. It is a documented atrocity. The ICC has already issued an arrest warrant for Putin over this. The evidence is not in dispute. The moral case is not complicated. And if the United States cannot label that state-sponsored terrorism, then the designation itself has lost all meaning. But the critics, and not just Rand Paul, raise a question that deserves a real answer, not a rhetorical one. What happens the day after the designation lands? Russia is already sanctioned to the edge of what sanctions can accomplish. China, India, and Brazil are already absorbing Russian oil outside the dollar system. The designation adds legal weight. It adds symbolic pressure. But does it change the battlefield calculus for a regime that has already absorbed the full force of Western economic punishment and kept fighting? Graham says yes. The bill says yes. History is less certain. Look at the 4 countries currently designated state sponsors of terrorism under U.S. law: Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Syria. Every one of them is still standing. Every one of them has found a way to survive the designation. Iran, the most sanctioned nation on earth, still funds Hezbollah, still develops its nuclear program, still exports regional instability. Designation did not stop the conduct. It documented it. Why now? That is the question. The Berlin negotiations are happening in real time. The Trump administration is engaged. A ceasefire framework is being discussed. And Graham is simultaneously pushing a bill that would make Russia radioactive in the international financial system, while those talks are live. Is that pressure, or is it interference? Is Graham trying to strengthen the American hand at the table, or is he putting a grenade in the room? The answer depends entirely on whether you believe Putin responds to escalating pressure or retreating from it. And that is a genuine empirical disagreement, not a moral one, where reasonable people look at the same history and reach opposite conclusions. Here is the historical parallel nobody is drawing. In 1938, the British Parliament debated whether economic pressure on Germany would deter further expansion. The appeasement camp argued that isolation and punishment would radicalize, not moderate, the regime. The intervention camp argued that anything short of a hard line was surrender by increment. Both arguments were made with conviction. Both arguments had evidence behind them. The appeasement camp was catastrophically wrong, but not because their argument was stupid. They were wrong because they misread the nature of the adversary. Graham's Hitler reference on the floor was not accidental. He has made it before. He will make it again. Because he believes, and he may be right, that the nature of the Putin regime is more analogous to 1930s Germany than to the kind of adversary that responds to diplomatic off-ramps. Rand Paul believes the opposite. He believes intervention creates the conditions for escalation, that American military and economic entanglement abroad produces blowback, not security. His model has its own historical evidence: Iraq, Libya, the aftermath of Afghanistan. Regimes destabilized, power vacuums filled by something worse. The difference is this: in Ukraine, America did not destabilize the regime. Russia invaded it. That changes the moral and strategic calculus in ways Paul has never fully answered. Short sentences now, because this is where it gets sharp. 20,000 children. Taken. Documented. Some in camps. Some in North Korea. Some now fighting for the country that kidnapped them. If America cannot respond to that with something more than a blocked floor vote, what exactly is American power for? If this is the analysis you are not finding anywhere else, you already know what to do. The bill is sitting there. The votes are there. The moral case is airtight. And yet the floor stays silent. Because one senator, exercising a procedural right that exists for legitimate reasons, has decided this is the hill. History does not remember the procedural objection. It remembers the outcome. And the outcome of this moment, whether Russia gets designated, whether the children come home, whether the ceasefire holds, whether the third invasion happens in 2027 or 2031, that outcome is still being written. Right now. In rooms like the one you just watched. The story is not finished. It is barely started. If you made it this far, subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and drop your thoughts in the comments, because this conversation is too important to stay inside one YouTube channel.